What do you think of the film? I think a few people joined you in that today. Is it strange to have the story, Eric's story and your story told in this way, on the big screen, where across the world now millions of people are going to see this film? Is it Nicole Kidman is playing you? Is this a strange phenomenon for you?
It's very strange. I come from a small town. I'm not a professional. I'm just somebody who loved her husband and her best for him. And this is what it's led me to. Very odd indeed. But thank you. Very kind of you.
Sadly, Eric is no longer with us, and he was unable to see the final project, although I'm going to ask Jonathan in a minute. I know he played a big part in the production of it, at least in some of the information he gave. What would he have felt seeing this final project? What would his reaction have been for this?
Well, I can only say that Eric was very pleased that the film was being made, and he trusted the producers and the whole team to make his story and the message of the story as well as could possibly be. But he had no wish to see the final film. He was afraid that the film would be so good that it would make him remember too much of what he was trying to come to terms with. I find that it's very sad that he's not here. He should be, but he wouldn't wish to be.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come to you now, Jonathan. Was it then? So you had this pressure of, it's an autobiographical story. Was that ever a challenge for you as a director to be authentic, to tell the true story?
Well, I think even though the film was based on Eric's book, it was very much a case of also getting to know Eric and Patti and basing the film on that relationship as that developed. As I said, Andy and his team had worked and developed the film for many years and got to know Eric and Patti very well. So by the time I became involved, a great trust had been built up and a great friendships had been built up. So it was kind of a shortcut for me to be able to actually access Patti and Eric in that way and in a sense immerse myself in the emotional landscape of the film, because I always felt that was where, in a way, the emotional truth of the film was what we wanted to try and capture. I think Patti understood fairly early on that we could never put everything into the story because it's a whole life, but our aim is to capture the emotional truth and the essence of Eric.
Nagase, and he said to us, the pain just went away. And we said, that's great, but we can't write that. And I don't think he yet understood how he had made that sort of progress from truly wanting to kill this man to finding the grace to forgive him. And we had, I think, the immense privilege of working with Eric and Patti to try and make sense of that. And what we tried to do really in the third act of this film was to play out physically what Eric experienced in his head. And being very frank, we didn't stop until Eric and Patti read the screenplay and gave us their blessing that, if you like, this is what it felt like. So that was really the challenge, was to try and make a film that you could stand there with Patti by your side at the end and have a feeling that it was the right thing to do. It's amazing.
Yes and no. I mean, in a way, you become so embroiled in the drama of it and the practicalities of actually making it. But I've never worked on anything where everyone, from both cast and crew, was so acutely aware of wanting to do, in a sense, donate good work to this project, because I think it just spoke to everyone in a way that everyone could identify with. And I think the idea of forgiveness and the idea of reconciliation was, without trying to preach a message, because I don't think, you know, films are at their best when they do that. They're better when dramatically you in a sense, immerse that message within the texture of the film. But certainly there are always difficult days, but they're not really to do with the material, although, you know, shooting things like the waterboarding and what have you, which, you know, is sort of a frightening thing. In many ways, it was our intention to show as little as possible with that. But when Jeremy Irvine was able to do it so effectively, we kind of slightly changed course and constructed it in a different way. But yeah, I mean, on every film, regardless of what it is, it throws up both emotional and sort of literal problems along the way. But with this, it was almost like we always kept in sight the end story, which was about something life-affirming and positive, and that, I guess, sustains you through the kind of horrible bits.
To Patti Lomax's house, and seeing Nicole and Patti looking at her roses. That was an extraordinary end to a very long journey. And for me, actually, the moment that I couldn't take was actually standing on that hillside in Queensland when we were doing those first beatings, and that Japanese guard shouting Lomax. And when he shouted Lomax the second time, that was more than I could take.
You mentioned Jeremy Irvine, we've got Nicole Kidman, we've got Colin Firth, amazing performances here. How important is it as a director and as a producer? I think everyone knows the answer to this question, but how important is it to have these people on board?
Well, you know, the thing is about people like, you know, casts like this and talent like this is that they are who they are because they're fantastically talented and dedicate themselves to a film like this in a way that, you know, you just sort of marvel at their commitment to it. And, you know, for them, the film like this presented great challenges, but also, in some respects, great rewards because of the depth and complexity of the characters. And for them, I know what it meant to have access to the real people was an amazing thing. And but you know, for me as a director, to work with people like that, you know, you want to work with people of that quality every day you go to work. And you know, as a filmmaker, you try and make the depth and the complexity of the films each time you go out and do it, you know, as great as possible, to give you all, as the audience, you know, an experience that hopefully you take away, and you know, and it lasts with you, and it has some effect, and you know, it has an emotional engagement, and so, you know, they are very much a huge part of presenting, you know, a story to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, we were very lucky. Colin Firth called us up one day when Jonathan was in London. And so I met this boy at a party last night, and he's obviously far too good looking to play the young me, but I just thought we might want to meet him. That was Jeremy Irvine who came in, and actually was the only person we ever looked at. We met this boy. He came in, and he's only 21. He'd actually read the book a few years ago. He came in with this pile of research, but most of all, he just was the young Colin Firth. And you know, I'm proud of so much of this film, but the way that those two, young and old Eric, work for me, I think is just miraculous.
I mean, you know, the work that Colin and Jeremy did together was probably the most important preparation that took place on the film, because they built that character together. And it's very difficult, particularly as an actor, when you are just playing half a character. And so Colin, for example, he plays only the emotional consequences of what his younger self endured, which another actor plays. And so, you know, he had to create a whole motivation and a whole reason for his behaviour and how he felt and what have you. And I think working together, the dedication the two of them had and working together really brought that character to life and made, hopefully for you all, made it feel as if they were one character.
Absolutely. I was amazed at how much Jeremy sounded like Colin Firth. It's almost like he was mimicking him all, but it was fantastic.
The thing this film was that everyone involved, it didn't really matter what they were doing, was felt that it was important and really wonderful story to tell.
I'm just going to take a quick break for a second and ask you a couple more questions about how important the flights are.
Well, we shot in 3 different countries, and obviously with a film like this, you know, the visual aspect is incredibly important. So, you know, we tried to give it a grandeur and a sweep, and you know, it's part of the pleasure of going to the cinema, and I think it's part of the emotional journey that the film takes. So it was obviously a very key factor in, you know, in our plan.
Yeah. Does anyone from the audience, would anyone like to ask a question for anyone up here on the stage? A little bit difficult to see you, but...
The film is sold to Japan, and our next stop is at the Tokyo Film Festival in a couple of weeks. So that will be a very interesting screening, to say the least. But in a couple of Toronto, both Toronto and in San Sebastian, where we've just been, at different times. Small groups of Japanese who saw the film in both those places came up and talked to us about it. And they were in both places they were quite young, in as much as they were probably in their mid to late 20s, early 30s. So they were of a younger generation, but they were very enthused by the film. But we will wait and see it when we get to Tokyo.
Does anyone else have a question for Jonathan or Andy or Patti? Yes, please loud as you can.
I just wonder, is a chapter therapy left out, or was it known this time to the veterans in the British Army? There's no attempt. I think it's a typical post-traumatic flashbacks and everything, and I was very astonished that no therapeutic attempt was even mentioned in the whole movie. Didn't that happen?
What you're asking is, was there any therapy offered to?
Yeah, it is a typical thing what he did then when he came back.
Well, when they came back from
it is a confrontation with the situation, but you can also do that in a therapeutic frame. So
yes.
I was astonished that
I think Patti Lomax
mentioned it all.
No, there was absolutely nothing, particularly the Far Eastern prisoners of war, because the war in Europe, as you know, had been over for some months before the war in the Far East was over in, I think it's August. So these men came back to more or less a country that had already moved on. And they were just expected to get on with their lives too. And this is part of the reason that the film is so important, because it shows that even I don't know how it is here and in surrounding countries, but in Britain there's still very little except charity help for people coming back from Afghanistan. So it's said that probably have not had an arm or a leg blown off, so have not got an obvious injury, and yet they have seen terrible things. And if these people are not treated, my husband was not treated, helped, then it leads to all sorts of terrible trouble in later life, particularly. My husband had problems right through his life, but it became worse when he retired from his regular work and had more time to think about these things. Does that answer?
Any other questions from the audience?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Have any of the men that returned from the war seen the film? And what were their reactions to it? Anyone from the British Legion still?
I think there are plans leading up to the release of the film in Britain for that to take place. I know the first place it gets released is in Australia, and I know they've been shown as we speak to the RSL, which is the Return Service League in Australia, and the response has been overwhelming so far. So, you know, I think on the few people who have seen it, seem to be responding in a way that they feel as if their story and their experience is being brought out to the open, and that seems to be a positive thing. You might have.
Yeah, on the I mean, we had some veterans who visited us on set while we were actually making the film. And we're going to work very closely with Eric's regiment and the Royal Signals as we go forward into the release. What I think we feel very strongly about is that all the men who were on that railway respond so powerfully to the notion that we get to the end of the film, that they were treated the way they were treated by a nation brainwashed or otherwise who believed that they were disgraced by surrendering. But actually, these men never surrendered. They were in Singapore at a time when that place could never have been defended. They were told while they were fighting that they had surrendered. And they went through this whole appalling episode, having been told that they were disgraced men, but they never surrendered. And that message going out to them makes them feel, I think, heard and understood for possibly the first time. So we're going to bring, there are very few of them left, sadly, but we're going to bring as many of them as we possibly can into the process over the next few months as we can.
But I think the friendship and the feeling that developed between Nagase-san and my husband it's easy to call it friendship. That friendship really is just a word that's not deep enough. They really became, well, as Mr. Nagase said to me once, we are blood brothers now. It was a great experience shared. They both had been to a place psychologically that they both recognized, which normal friendship wouldn't have done. But it did take a little while for them to form that trust. It wasn't immediate, but there was a respect immediately.
On Sunday nights coming soon, so this would be my last question. You guys have, Andy and Jonathan, you guys have worked together before, collaborated, Burning Man, intensely emotional film, I know, also personally for you. We've seen this film, it's just amazing and also so emotionally impacting. Are you guys going to collaborate again, and what can we expect? What are you working on now, and when's the next tearjerker for us going to come?
I'm sure that'll be the case, but I think we're just recovering from doing those two films at the moment. But, we've made Burning Man and we've made Railway Man, so we need a man film to finish the trilogy.
Well, whatever it is, I know it's going to be fantastic, and I wish you guys the best.